Osiyo. We ended the last video by leaving Ross's Landing in Chattanooga and crossing the Tennessee River with the Richard Taylor Detachment. Here, the Trail of Tears actually began for our Blair relatives.
The Taylor Detachment was one of 3 that left Ross's Landing, but the much larger number, 12 detachments, left further north from Fort Cass near Charleston, Tennessee. At that time, the north side of the Hiawassee River was located in the United States, and the south side of the river was a thriving community in the Cherokee Nation called Walker's Ferry. Now, many Cherokee families lived in Walker's Ferry with their homesteads, missions, stores, schools, farmland, and lived a quiet, comfortable life.
Just south of Walker's Ferry was Red Clay, which served as the Cherokee capital and council grounds after the capital had been moved from New Echota near Calhoun, Georgia in 1832. Now, this might sound a little familiar. At the Red Clay Council grounds in October of 1835, a proposed treaty ceding Cherokee lands to the United States in return for the Cherokee moving west was unanimously rejected by the Cherokee. This is what led 2 months later to the signing of the fraudulent Treaty of New Echota by a minority faction of Cherokee led by Major Ridge, ceding the last remaining portion of Cherokee homeland and setting up their removal to the west. At Red Clay, which was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1972, there are replicas of a Cherokee farmhouse, cabins, and a council house, and an interpretive center with exhibits and artifacts. A sapphire blue spring which provided water for the Cherokee capital in the 1830s still produces over 400,000 gallons of water every day. There are picnic facilities and hiking trails, but the center point of the grounds is the eternal flame of the Cherokee Nation, a memorial to those who suffered and died on the Trail of Tears. In the area of Red Clay and Walker's Ferry, there was such a concentration of Cherokee that the last federal Indian agency was located there, and Red Clay became known as a gateway to the Cherokee Nation. In 1835, the agency was changed to Fort Cass, a federal military post, which a few years later became the scene of one of the greatest American tragedies carried out in our history, the forced removal of Cherokee people from their eastern homeland on what is known as the Trail of Tears. Fort Cass was one of 3 major immigration depots where Native Americans, mostly Cherokee, were rounded up and held under supervision of federal troops until their removal to Oklahoma. In fact, it was military headquarters for the entire Cherokee Trail of Tears operation. Fort Cass was a collection of 9 concentration camps covering about 30 square miles. By July of 1838, there were over 15,000 Cherokee prisoners, men, women, and children, camped there. Various diseases swept through the camps, including whooping cough, typhoid, and dysentery, resulting in over 25 deaths every day. Then, between August and early December, the Cherokee were organized into 12 detachments, and the march west began. The last Cherokee left Fort Cass on December the 5th, 1838, and today nothing remains of the fort or internment camps except the hilltop where it was located and the small landing where barges transported wagons and Cherokees across the Hiawassee River. 20 miles northwest of Fort Cass in Birchwood, Tennessee, is Blythe Ferry, one of the most important landmarks on the Trail of Tears. The ferry was started in 1809 at the confluence of the Hiawassee and Tennessee rivers. During the Cherokee removement, 9 detachments exited their ancestral lands at Blythe's Ferry. Some 9,839 Cherokee, with their 3,868 horses and 490 wagons, crossed the river here. It was there that they looked back for the last glimpse they would ever have of their beloved mountains and ancestral lands. Blythe's Ferry is a very spiritual place. You can walk part of the original trail there leading to the edge of the river, and as you walk and stand quietly looking out from the landing across the Tennessee River, you can sense the sorrow and suffering and feel the spirit and resilience of the thousands of Cherokee who crossed there. Blythe's Ferry remained in operation until 1994, when the state of Tennessee built a bridge across the river for State Highway 60. Currently, the ferry ramp is only used for boat launching and fishing. Adjacent to Blythe's Ferry is Cherokee Removal Memorial Park. The park was built as a memorial and to educate about the fate of the Cherokee and the Trail of Tears. At the park is a history center, a story wall showing the timeline of the Trail of Tears, hiking trails following a portion of the original trail route, and an outside amphitheater whose sunken stone floor traces the removal routes. 5 granite columns engraved with the names of 2,535 Cherokee heads of household and the numbers of their family members who were removed to Oklahoma on the forced march stand as a memorial to those who survived, and over 4,200 of the 17,000 Cherokee who perished as a result of the removal in 1838. The names of our relatives are some of those engraved on the memorial columns: George Blair, Nancy Blythe, Sweetwater, and William Henson. About 5 or 6 days after the Taylor detachment left Ross's Landing, they camped near Dunlop, Tennessee, in what is now Dunlop Coke Ovens State Park. According to the diary account written by missionary Daniel Buttrick, who traveled with the detachment, and I'll quote him, "Last night was very rainy so that we could scarcely keep dry in our little carryall, and many of the Cherokees, having no tents, were soaking wet, lying on the wet ground," unquote. At that time, the detachment had traveled about 48 miles. The next morning, they left early and began to cross the Cumberland Plateau. This day, they traveled about 8 miles and camped on Cumberland Mountain, near a house from whence we drew provisions, according to Buttrick. And still quoting him, "The landlord had also a supply of whiskey, and though he had promised Mr. Taylor, I understand, not to sell to the Cherokees, yet drinking soon commenced among Cherokees and whites, so that members were drinking and yelling most of the night, and one Cherokee, being drunk, lay down by the fire and came very near to burning to death," unquote. At daybreak the next morning, according to Buttrick, quote again, "we started to descend the mountain and traveled 10 miles to the foot of Cumberland Mountain and spent the night in the Vale of Sodom, commonly called Sequatchie Valley. Here the people were wicked exceedingly," unquote. Leaving the Vale of Sodom, the detachment continued to head northwest, passing through Murfreesboro and what is now designated as Stones River National Battlefield, named after the 1862 Battle of Stones River, one of the bloodiest conflicts of the Civil War. The trail followed the old Nashville Highway through the battlefield, heading to Tennessee's capital city. Somewhere outside of Nashville, Jenny Blair Sweetwater, her husband Gordon, and all 4 of their children fell ill and died. Their deaths were not noted, their graves were not marked, and yet we remember them still and honor their memory. In Nashville, the detachment crossed the Cumberland River on the very first bridge that was ever built across the Cumberland. The west abutment of the 1823 bridge still stands today near the present Victory Memorial Bridge and Old Fort Nashboro, and is designated a Trail of Tears National Historic Trail Site. Port Royal was the detachment's last stop in Tennessee before entering Kentucky. Not much to see there, but the Cherokee did camp beside the Red River in what is now Port Royal State Historic Park. There is a preserved 300-yard section of the trail that you can walk inside the park, And it's also possible to drive the original Trail of Tears route all the way from Cooperstown, Tennessee to Port Royal, which we did.
Folks, we're in Cooperstown, Tennessee.
At Port Royal.
And we are about to start driving down a section of the original route of the Trail of Tears. This is going from Cooperstown to Springfield. So we'll show you a little bit of that.
At Port Royal, the detachment was 191 miles from Fort Cass and had 583 miles to go to reach the end of the trail and on to Kentucky.
Here's a bit of irony for you. Sad but ironic just the same. James Hayes Blair's firstborn daughter with his white wife, Margaret Powell Blair, was named Argent. She was born in 1784 and was about 5 years old when her Cherokee half-brother from another mother, George Odequanosee Blair, was born. In 1802, at age 18, Argent married a military guy named Benjamin Cleveland. He was just a grunt soldier at the time, but he was a climber. He distinguished himself in the Creek and Indian War and in the War of 1812, and was eventually promoted to brigadier general. Now, Cleveland was named after and raised by his grandfather, who was a prominent landowner and revolutionary patriot who distinguished himself in the American Revolution at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Remember that one? That's where Argent's father, Colonel James Hayes, became mildly famous as the Paul Revere of the South. Now, the younger Benjamin Cleveland then became a prominent citizen of Habersham County and served in the state legislature for the county for about 20 years. But here's the real irony. General Benjamin Cleveland commanded a troop of cavalry in 1838, which was charged with the removal and the escort of Argent's half-brother and all the other Cherokee Indians from Georgia to their new exile homes in the Oklahoma Indian Territory. Did Argent or her husband know? Probably not, but it's still sad but true. Today, both Argent and the general are buried in the city cemetery in Clarksville, Georgia.